Hello and welcome to my channel. Today we are going to learn chapter 3, what is government. You must have heard the word government mentioned several times. In this chapter, you will learn about what a government is and the important role it plays in our lives. What do governments do? How do they decide what to do? What is the difference between different types of governments such as monarchies and democracies? Let's read more and find out. So you may have seen these clippings in newspapers quite frequently. Government sought to protect rights of unorganized workers. Government fixes prices of onions, says no shortage in market, etc. So let's find out what these exactly mean by reading further. It will be helpful if you have your textbooks in front of you and read along as we go. So every country needs a government to make decisions and get things done. These can be decisions about where to build roads and schools or how to reduce the price of onions when they get too expensive or ways to increase the supply of electricity. The government also takes action on many social issues. For example, it has several programs to help the poor. So the government decides on key things like these where to build roads and schools, how to reduce the price of onions when they get too expensive, how to increase the supply of electricity, and it also takes action on many social issues, as you can see over here. For example, it has several programs to help the poor, like it distributes ration, rice, and it gives them education and many other things. So it does other important things such as running postal and railway services. The Indian Railways and the Postal Department are run by Government of India. And moving on, the government also has the job of protecting the boundaries of the country and maintaining peaceful relations with other countries. So this is also one of the key area where the government has work to do. So it protects the boundaries of the country and maintains peaceful relations with other countries. It is responsible for ensuring that all its citizens have enough to eat and have good health facilities. So the government should make sure that the citizens have enough to eat and have good facilities. When there are natural disasters like tsunami or an earthquake, it is the government that mainly organizes aid and assistance for the affected people. So they has our country has been affected by tsunami more than 10 years ago, and we've also seen earthquakes. So in such situations, it's the government's responsibility to organize aid and assistance for the affected people. It does that through, we also have a national disaster response force, uh, which is which is put into action when we are suffering from a tsunami or an earthquake or any other natural calamity. So if there is a dispute or if someone has committed a crime, you find people in a court. Courts are also part of the government. So the courts that are there in your city, in your town, are also a part of the government. Perhaps you are wondering how governments manage to do all this and why is it necessary for them to do so? When human beings live and work together, there needs to be some amount of organization so that decisions can be made. So you may be wondering, why do we need a government? So when human beings, when we work and live together, so there needs to be some kind of organization where decisions are made who can look after us. So that's where a government is necessary. So moving on, so some rules have to be made that apply to everyone. For example, there is a need to control resources and protect the territory of a country so people can feel secure. Absolutely, because somebody has to take decisions. I mean, key decisions, like controlling the resources, like the minerals and petroleum and etc., and also to protect the territory of a country from foreign invasions, from threats. This is where governments play a key role as well, and governments do this on behalf of their people by exercising leadership. So they do this by exercising leadership. They are our leaders, taking decisions and implementing these among all the people living in their territory. So they take decisions for us and implement it for all the people living in our country. Now let us see what are the levels of government. Before that, so here it's asks you, can you list three things the government does which have not been mentioned? So the government decides on, citizenship. The second could be the central government decides on education, and third could be health. So these are the three things that come to my mind. You can think of something which you know. So there are many things that the government does. Well, these are the few things which I remember. So now that you know that the government is responsible for so many different things, can you think of how it manages to do all these? So it's a huge task. You may be wondering how the government does all this. Who are the government? What do they do? How do they manage to do all this? Let's read further to find out more. So the government works at different levels, at the local level, at the level of the state, and at the national level. See, that's how, so they divide the work. The local level means in your village, town, or locality. The state level would mean that which covers an entire state like Haryana or Assam, and the national level relates to the entire country. See the map over here. So the national level government covers the entire country. Okay. Whereas the state level, let's for example, if we talk about Maharashtra, is only concerned about their state. And that applies to every other state. Um, Before we do that, so some examples of institutions that are part of the government. So the Supreme Court is part of the government, like we read, all the courts are part of the government. Supreme Court is the topmost court in our country. And the Indian Railways. The Indian Railways is also part of the government, and Bharat Petroleum. So later in this book, you will read about how local level government functions, and when you go into the next few classes, you will learn about how governments function at the state and central levels. So this is a map for the administrative divisions. So basically, they are divided into um, several, several parts over here for administrative convenience. So this is how it looks like, the administrative map. And for your information, now India has 29 states. Telangana is the 29th state of India on the 2nd June 2014 after the reorganization of the state of Andhra Pradesh. Since 31st October 2019, the state of Jammu and Kashmir was divided into two union territories, Jammu and Kashmir and Ladakh. So moving on, laws and the government. The government makes laws, and everyone who lives in the country has to follow these. Absolutely, we have to be law abiding citizens. We have to follow the laws that are laid out by the government. This is the only way governments can function, certainly. Just like the government has the power to make decisions, similarly, it has the power to enforce its decisions. So the government makes laws for us. So they create these laws for us and they also enforce it, which is to put them into action. For example, um, if you if you ride without wearing a helmet, the government can impose a fine on you. So they create a law for saying that riding without helmets is an offense and you will be penalized for that. And the enforcement part is done by the traffic police who are also part of the government. So he actually does it. He actually issues you a fine when you do not wear a helmet. So that's how it works on the ground. For example, there is a law that says that all persons driving a motor vehicle must have a license. Any person caught driving a vehicle without a license can either be jailed or fined a large sum of money. So be careful, do not drive without a license or without a helmet. So without these laws, the government's power to make decisions is not of much use. So without these laws, if the government doesn't make any laws, their power is not very useful. So that's how it is. So think of an example of another law. Why do you think it is important that people abide by this law? So I told you another law is helmet. So there's several other laws like this which we have to abide because they are made for us, and we all have to be law-abiding citizens. That's how a country progresses. If you're a law-abiding citizen, if you follow the laws by the book, then it'll be good for everyone around you. In addition to any actions that the governments can take, there are also steps that people can take if they feel that a particular law is not being followed. So, in addition to any actions that the governments can take, so if the government makes a law and it sees that people are not following it, it can also take steps to see how that law can be implemented better or how it can get to make people follow the law. And if a person feels, for example, that they were not hired for a job because of their religion or caste, he or she may approach the court and claim that the law is not being followed. So, for example, if in the future, if a person is looking for a job and he's not being given the job because of his religion or caste, he can approach the court and claim that the law is not being followed. And the courts can then give orders about what should be done. So if you're suffering from discrimination uh, when it comes to jobs, you can go to the courts and say that, see, this is happening with me, I'm not getting a job because of my religion or my caste. Then the courts can give orders about what should be done. So types of government. Who gives the government this power to make decisions and enforce laws? The answer to this question depends on the type of government there is in a country. In a democracy, it is the people who give government this power. So in a democracy, this is pretty important. It's the people. It's actually the people who give government this power. It's us who give the government this power. In India, it's the people. Like, they do this through elections in which they vote for particular persons and elect them. So you must have seen in the news and read in the newspaper so many times. Every year there are some or the other elections in our country. So that's how our governments are elected to power. Once elected, these persons form the government. So after getting elected, they go ahead and form the government. In a democracy, the government has to explain its actions and defend its decisions to the people. So in a country like ours, which is a democracy, The government has to explain why it has brought out a law like this, and it also has to defend its decision as to why it has brought out this law. It has to give an explanation to the people. And another form of government is monarchy. The monarch, king or queen, has the power to make decisions and run the government. The monarch may have a small group of people to discuss matters with, but the final decision making power remains with the monarch. Unlike in a democracy, kings and queens do not have to explain their actions or defend the decisions they take. So, a democracy is quite the opposite. A monarchy is basically uh, where a king or queen has the power to make decisions. An example that comes to my mind is Saudi Arabia. It is a monarchy, and so they have a small group of people to discuss matters with. But remember, this is pretty interesting over here. But the final decision-making power remains with the monarch. So he takes advice from a small group that he has, but the ultimate decision-making power is with the monarch himself. Unlike a democracy, kings and queens do not have to explain their actions or defend the decision they take. So if there's any unpopular law or decision that a monarch makes, the people have to go by it. They cannot, they cannot protest against the monarch, or the monarch does not have to defend the decisions that they take. So they don't have to defend or explain to the people in their country why they are taking such decisions. So moving on, democratic governments. India is a democracy. Yes, we are a democracy, the world's largest democracy. This achievement is the result of a long and eventful struggle of the Indian people. There are other places in the world where people have struggled to have democracies. You know, you now know that the main feature of a democracy is that people have the power to elect their leaders. Yes. So in democracy, the key feature in a democracy is the people in the country will have power to elect their leaders. So, in a sense, democracy is ruled by the people. The basic idea is that people rule themselves by participating in making of these rules. That is so true in the Indian context. Democratic governments in our times are usually referred to as representative democracies. In representative democracies, people do not participate directly, but instead choose their representatives through an election process. So a representative democracy is something where you don't directly do the decision making. You elect somebody who represents you in the government. So So the MPs and MLAs that you see in the parliament, they have been voted to power by the common citizen or the average citizen for them to represent our views, our desires, and our wishes to the parliament. So that's what representative democracy means. These representatives meet and make decisions for the entire population. These days, a government cannot call itself democratic unless it allows what is known as universal adult franchise. This means that all adults in the country are allowed to vote. But it was not always like this. Can you believe that there was a time when governments did not allow women and the poor to participate in elections? That's really sad. That's not how democracy should function. Democracy should give opportunity to everybody. In their earliest forms, governments allowed only men who owned property and were educated to vote. This is purely discriminatory. This meant that women, the poor, the property less, and the uneducated were not allowed to vote. The country was governed by the rules and regulations that these few men made. So that's not how democracies function. Everybody should have the right to exercise their vote. Earlier, this was not the case, where only a few educated men were allowed to vote, and a lot of people were excluded, like women and property less, and people who were uneducated or illiterate. In India, before independence, only a small minority was allowed to vote. So before 1947, it says only a small amount of people were allowed to vote. And they therefore came together to determine the fate of the majority. So a small bunch of people who were allowed to vote decided the fate of the huge majority that was there. So several people, including Gandhiji, were shocked at the unfairness of this practice and demanded that all adults have the right to vote. This is known as universal adult franchise. So remember the word adult over here? In India, the above 18 years they are termed as adults. So after 18, you will have the eligibility to vote. So before that, let's read about this. So here we can see a struggle for um, voting rights. So let's read this. Nowhere in the world have governments willingly shared power. All over Europe and USA, women and the poor had to fight the participation in government. Women's struggle to vote got strengthened during the First World War. This movement is called women's suffrage movement, as the term suffrage usually means right to vote. So the word suffrage, it might be tempting to sound like they are suffering, but it actually means the right to vote. So during the war, many men were away fighting, and because of this, women were called upon to do work that was earlier considered men's work. Many women began organizing and managing different kinds of work. When people saw this, they began to wonder why they had created so many unfair stereotypes. So you have read this word stereotype in previous chapters about women and what they were capable of doing. So women began to be seen as equally capable of making decisions. Absolutely, so that they are equally capable. They should be given voting rights. In India, we now have equal voting rights for everyone above the age of 18. The suffragettes demanded the right to vote for all women, and to get their demands heard, they chained themselves to railings in public places. Many suffragettes were imprisoned and went on hunger strike, and they had to be fed by force. American women got the right to vote in 1920, while the women in UK got to vote on the same terms as men some years later in 1928. So they struggled and they protested for voting rights, and they have actually got this right in 1920 and in 1928 in America and UK respectively. So that's a very good fight they have waged on for equal rights, for equal voting rights, and they have won. So continuing this universal adult franchise, so writing in the journal Young India in 1931, Gandhiji said, I cannot possibly bear the idea that a man who has got wealth should have the vote, but that a man who has got character but no wealth or literacy should have no vote or that a man who works honestly by the sweat of his brow day in and day out should not have the vote for the crime of being a poor man. So Gandhiji says that why should only the rich or the literate should have a vote, whereas a man who has got character but no wealth or literacy should have no vote. So he's simply saying that why can a person who's not educated or literate should have voting rights. So he claims that everybody should have a voting right. That's what this paragraph talks about over here. So this is an exercise which you can do. So yeah, this is the end of the chapter here. So the in conclusion, Gandhi simply says that everyone should have voting right. But now you can currently, as it stands now, everybody above the age of 18 has voting rights in our country. So this is an exercise over here. Look at the maps, and all right. So that's the chapters in. I hope you liked it. Please do subscribe to the channel. I'll be back with the next chapter pretty soon. And until then, see you. Thank you for watching my video. Have a good day.